Hi, I'm Brian Elam, and I want to introduce you to my project, Growing Up Wren. I know it seems silly for me to introduce myself since many of you grew up with me and we know each other well, but the purpose of this piece is to give us something to pass down for generations of those who have Wren roots, of what it was like to grow up in the time that my mom and her siblings and my grandparents grew up. What it was like when my mom and her siblings grew up with things that we take for granted, like indoor plumbing. So I had the opportunity to sit down with my mom, Rosemary Elam, my uncle James Wren, my aunt Lois Reason, uncle Gerry Wren, and aunt Debby Wren Mathis to talk about what it was like growing up on North Pekin Lane and what it was like growing up as the children of James and Mary Wren, and what we can learn from that and the values that were instilled upon them. This was recorded on July 24th of 2022. I hope you enjoy. We're at my mom's house, and the great spot is we're right next door to where you all grew up. So it's nice to be, to have these memories that will kind of come up from sitting here. And really, I just look forward to the conversation. I just want to set the perspective a little bit. So my mom, Rosemary, she was born in September of 1935. Then my Uncle Jim, April of 1938. Aunt Lois, September of 1939. And then Gerry, April 1946. And my Aunt Debby, December of 1951.
August of 1950.
Of 50, okay. Whatever, thank you. That's why I had those correct to make sure. So we have a 15-year span of ages. So the nice thing with the 15-year span, we're going to get a lot of different perspective of of some of growing up here in Hanna City, and that goes with that. I want to get started with this real simple. Mom, if you can start, we'll start with you. What was your very first memory as a child?
Oh, wow.
It wouldn't have been Hanna City.
You mean in Hanna City?
No, your first memory is all. First thing if you think back, what's the youngest or memory that you have?
Probably when I lived, Mom and Dad lived on Pleasant Hill, or by Pleasant Hill School. I don't know the name of the road. I think it was Malone. And it was at the top of the hill, and we lived in a rented house with Uncle John and Aunt Jessie. And there was a little girl across the street, her name was Carol Jones, and she and I would play together. I was probably 3.5, 4 maybe, somewhere in there. That's the first memory that I have
Of life.
Yeah.
Uncle Jim?
Well, I must have been living there too, but I sure don't remember it. The first memory I remember is in Bellevue, and they were digging ditches in the street, putting in some kind of utility probably, and I was eating the dirt, and Mom asked the doctor about it, and they said I probably lacked iron in my body. So that's my first memory.
And Lois?
My first memories were Bellevue also. And I was a baby when they were building there. And I can remember going to Pearl and Frank's grocery store, and they would always give us penny candy. And down the street from us. Mom had walked with us down to there. I remember we had a woman doctor there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. A woman doctor.
Yeah. And I remember I fell off the porch and I carried those scars for a while because I fell on a picket fence.
Gerry?
The thing that really comes to mind that, and I don't know what night, it was probably a Friday night or a Saturday night, but we would sit down on the floor in front of this big console radio, and all these programs would come on, and there was Fibber McGee and Molly and I think it was Gangbusters or something, and Lone Ranger, and it was just like one program after another. And I so much looked forward to that. I don't know how old I was. I just remember sitting on the floor, but there would be, you know, these police chasing these gangsters, and you could hear the cars skidding, and in my mind I could just picture all of this, and I mean, that was like our night of entertainment, because this was before TV, we had TV and all that, so.
Very cool.
And you know what, I think that console radio was down in your basement, that big. Did you have that old console radio, didn't it sit
Was it an old
downstairs?
Phillips?
That
Yeah.
came from the radar base.
Oh, it did, okay.
It
So
was in
wasn't-
Bob's
It looked a lot like the
dorm
one we
room
had.
at the radar base, and he gave it to us when
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
we
And you never missed Inner Sanctum.
Yeah, oh,
Mysteries.
oh, and that was so scary.
Inner Sanctum
Of course,
Mysteries.
like I say, I was probably, I don't know.
Squeaking door.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
squeaky door.
And
You hear
Debbie?
that creaking open?
My first memory, I would have been, I think, 4. And I was the flower girl for your mom and dad.
Ah,
And that's probably my earliest memory. And I can remember I had a beautiful blue Swiss polka dotted dress and a floral headband, which I still have. And yeah, I remember being the flower girl. And then I remember Aunt Lois telling me no quite a bit through the ceremony because I wanted to drink. So she kept telling me no. And then when I went back down the aisle, I wanted to pick up the rose petals that I dropped. And Lois again was telling me no.
I told her no a lot in her life.
so you mentioned that the place that the rental place where you lived, and then Bellevue was after that, I take it.
we lived in several places in Peoria when I was little, and Jim would have been little, he wouldn't remember.
No, I don't remember.
But we lived in several places. I have pictures of them in an album.
Okay.
Dad and I and Ben drove around Peoria, and he took us to the houses as they lived in them, and I took pictures, took pictures of them.
All right. Cool. When did you move? When did you move to Hanna City?
We moved to Hanna City in 1945.
1945. And so that house is small.
Mhm.
There's 5 of you, 2 grandma and grandpa. How did the dynamic change as the family got bigger and they had living in the house? How did you guys manage that small house and all of you there?
It didn't change.
Lois and Rosemary had a room, Gerry and I had a room, and I guess when she got born, she was in Mom and Dad's room.
No, she
I
was in the
remember.
middle of us.
Well, oh really?
Yeah.
Because I
She
remember
was-
after Rosemary left, then you two were together.
Yeah.
No, I
yes.
remember. I do remember sleeping between Lois and Rosemary,
In
and I was
a double
always
bed.
squished.
And the
So-
double bed filled the room.
I learned that if I wanted more room, I would just have to pull their hair or stick my feet in their face, and they'd move over.
So let's talk about grandma a little bit. And what's your first memories and your perspective of my grandmother, your mom Mary, as a child? Give me kind of your view of your mom when you were that child, how you saw her.
I would say a laborer. She was always
Always
busy.
working.
Always busy. Constantly with the kids, and the way, of course, we had to do the washing and all that stuff. I mean, she would that's the way I remember her. Seemed like she was busy all the time.
Yeah, she was very loving, but everything was homemade. I mean, she baked bread, she would cook all our meals. We would go to bed, she would still be up working. But she used to share a lot, though, of her stories of growing up, in the Depression. Of course, her dad died when she was 3 years old, so she talked, a lot about her stories. she was, I don't know how old she was, a little girl, but her job in her family is she had a job where before school, she would go make the beds for these people, it's like the old feather beds. And she would make up those beds every day. And she got a quarter every week. And she, with the quarter, 20 cents, she bought 2 loaves of bread for the family, and then she got to buy a Clark bar for herself.
Oh,
With
wow.
the nickel.
Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with Jim. Dad worked second shift most that I remember. There was one time when he was laid off from maternal and he worked at Nelson's company. They made water fixtures of different kinds. And he worked there for a year or more, and he worked days. But most of the time he worked second shift, and I'm like Jim. Mom was busy all day, but Mom was always, she would talk with us. I mean, it wasn't like we were separated from her by her work. And we all had jobs, we all had chores. When we moved to Hanna City, Dad decided that we kids needed jobs. And now that I'm an adult, I agree with you. But my job was, and Lois, was dishes. And, but Mom was always working, and she was up yet when we went to bed. And when Dad came home, she would fix him a breakfast or whatever he wanted before he went to bed. And then she was up in the morning to get us off to school. I don't know, I always worried about my mom, that she didn't get enough sleep.
Yeah.
But she never complained.
I never heard her complain once.
I never heard her say anything bad about anybody.
No.
You know, I think my favorite time with Mom was when we were small and we didn't buy groceries the way they buy groceries now. On Saturday, we got to go to the bakery. Sometimes we'd get to pick out something special for ourselves, like a cream puff. And then we'd go to the meat market. Well, during Depression, she wasn't able to buy as much meat as she would like for us as a big family. And so he would give her heart and tongue and stuff like that, kind of without having a stamp to buy it, because we had ration stamps at that time for sugar and meat and groceries. So I love going shopping with Mom and going to all these places for different things.
So you went from being children to teenagers with your mom. How did things change? Was she still working the same amount, the same way? Did things change as you got older with her? Different memories, different thoughts?
Well, she had a little more modern, rather than scrubbing the clothes, she had a washing machine which you cranked the printer to
Hanger washer.
And so she had some more convenient things, but she still was always busy.
Well, by the time we were teenagers or preteen, then there was Debbie and Gerry. So,
Yeah.
you know, that added more to the confusion. And so it made Mom busier with young kids. So we were responsible a lot of times to take care of the younger kids, to take them to the grocery store, walk to the grocery store with us or wherever. I remember I had to take Gerry for haircuts. I hated that.
Well, the one mean thing that she did to me, we didn't have inside facilities, we had outhouse, and it's still traumatic. It's probably bothered me to this day.
Yeah.
It was very cold evening, and I had to go to the toilet, and I was afraid to go out there in the dark, and so Mom had Lois walk me out. So she's standing outside while I'm in the outhouse, And she's out there dancing around in the cold and screaming at me, "You better hurry up, I'm gonna leave, I'm gonna leave." That was a lot of tension.
So when did you get indoor plumbing?
Oh, boy.
Oh, I
Jim?
remember that.
Jim might remember that because he kept complaining about it. I don't remember him doing it, but he had to dig the hole for the
Well, I
septic
spent my
tank.
whole childhood digging. The first, he mentioned the outhouse, that was the first hole I had. Well, Dad dug 95% of it, but when he went to work second shift, like she mentioned, better be something done when he get back, you know. So I had to dig. And then the next thing, he decided he wanted running water into the house. So that meant digging a ditch from the house to the well. And boy, that's a story too. And then there was, of course, he built a porch to make a bathroom, which meant a huge hole for the septic tank. And then he decided he wanted a furnace, which he got from the church. And that meant digging out the cellar, actually, so that it would fit in the basement. So, yeah, it just seemed like I was digging all the time.
I when they had the place on the Mississippi River, I remember one time I got to take over some of the digging duties there. And I remember one summer I got to dig a hole. I think it was for a well or something, and it was about a 6-foot deep hole, probably about 4 by 4 square. Yeah, and I got to help him do that. So.
Before the furnace, we had 2 stoves. There was one in the kitchen and one in the living room. The boys dressed behind the kitchen stove, and us girls dressed behind the living room stove. And to keep warm, it was cold when we'd get up in the morning.
Yeah, these are old coal stoves,
Yeah.
and there's no heat in the bedroom. So, you know, you got up and you ran out to
And I
the
missed all
dress
that.
by the.
Yeah. What year did the indoor plumbing? You said, do you remember?
I remember that because I remember while he was digging all the holes, I was making mud pies.
So did Grandma treat the boys and the girls differently? Do you feel there was any difference in the way she nurtured you?
From what I heard from Debbie, we had different parents.
She did, because I would want to go play cops and robbers and whatever with all the boys in the neighborhood, and she said, "Nope, girls don't do that. You're a girl, you shouldn't be playing that."
I remember you with me a lot.
Yeah,
So,
I could
but there
remember.
was only boys in the neighborhood.
I can remember Gerry and his friends playing football in the backyard. And when I was young, I would play with them, and that was fine. Well, when I got to be like teenagers, Mom told me, "No, you can no longer go play football with those boys," which broke my heart, you know, because that's a big conflict. So, yeah, there was a time when.
It was a time that you had to be a lady. You could not be a roughneck anymore.
So as you're adults now and with your own children, would you agree with her? Would you agree with that?
Not in my neighborhood.
That's not a
No,
wrong answer.
the girls played with the
But
boys.
I asked
too.
that more because the perspective of the world has changed a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Yeah.
To a degree. So.
Yeah, we had a lot of kids in our neighborhood when our girls were growing up, and so the girls and boys, they all played together
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And even after they got into high school, they, walked to school together and
Yeah.
whatever, rode
You know, they
bikes
were-
together.
When she mentioned about, the coal stoves, the coal stove in the kitchen was a potbelly
Mhm.
stove.
warm morning.
That reminded me of a memory. One of the things that I loved, we used to sleigh ride right outside the back door. Because our backyard was a hill all the way down to the
Before
to
the wall
woods.
was there.
Right.
Yeah,
And this is, again, I don't remember how old I was. I was pretty small. But this is before waterproof gloves and all that stuff. And so all we had for gloves were these cotton gloves. And I remember Mom, you'd be out sleigh riding and you get cold and my gloves would get all wet and I'd come in to warm up. And Mom would always say, don't put those gloves on the stove because, you're going to burn them or whatever. And it's like, I want to get out and go sleigh riding. So as soon as she wasn't looking, I'd put those things on the stove, and they'd be hissing and steaming, and then pull them off real quick, and when they were dry. But I had to do it when she wasn't looking.
I have something talking about sleigh riding. Do you remember the jump off?
Yes, very
You
well.
guys know what the jump off was?
No.
It, where they dug the air shaft.
You go
Oh,
behind the old man.
absolutely.
Put that, they piled it all dirt there. So when you came down that hill, you kind of came down, leveled off, and it just dropped. And we noticed, it's in the backyard in the wintertime, of course, you can see all the way to school. And they were kids over there sleigh riding. And so we grabbed the sled, and her and I went over there, and of course got one up the rest of them, because you'd start, you wouldn't go all the way to the top, because you're scared to, because you're going to have to go off that jump. So I went up just a little bit, and went down, no problem. And then she had the one up me. She went further up. When she come down, the sled just enough to where it nosedived. When it hit, it stopped. She didn't.
And of those who
I think we took that sled home in pieces.
But I don't have that kind of memory, because I wasn't allowed in the woods down there, because the mine shaft might open up and swallow me.
I grew up with a mine shaft down there, is don't play around the mine shaft because you could fall in and you'll.
Yeah.
So, for those who are viewing this, behind the houses here is a ravine that goes for miles and miles back, but not too far from here there was a lot of coal mines underneath there, and there's a mine shaft that was to put air into the mines.
Yeah.
And I think it's still there today. It's
I don't know if it is.
I don't know.
I don't know.
it was there when I was in.
I know.
But I mean, it hasn't been that.
That's not like an adventure, we have to
Yeah.
wander back there to see if it's still there.
Well, let's go through that. We went through Grandma Lowe. Go
I'd
ahead,
like
sorry.
to go back
Okay.
a little bit. When we were young kids and moved to Hanna City, Mom taught us how to play 500 rummy. She played cards with us. We played, I like goldfish, I guess, but we
Yeah.
used playing cards. Dig the well dry, that was a game she taught us. So she did spend time with us. She took time to teach us. Also, Lois, another games to be played was jacks
Yeah.
and paper dolls. We didn't have a lot of toys, but
The ball game with
it was,
bouncing ball and yeah.
but it was games that didn't take a lot of room.
Yeah.
We didn't have a lot of toys, but that's the things that we could use for
And I
toys
can,
and spend our
Yeah.
time.
and I can say, being the youngest, a lot of the memories they have, I don't have.
Yeah.
But when I was young, I was always with Lois and Rosemary, because by that time, Grandma and Grandpa was living next door. Dad had built a house for them, and they were basically both in the woods.
Yeah.
And so my mom spent a lot of time taking care of Grandma and Grandpa. So they took care of me. And so I was with them a lot. Rosemary was always Sis. Lois was Lodi. So that's what I always called them. But I can remember when they had jobs and went to work. I look forward to their paydays because they always brought something. It might have been a coloring book. It might have been a new thing of paper dolls. And if they come home and forgot to bring me something, I would be devastated. But they did, and I think that's kept us really close. Because, I depended on them so much when I was young. And I can even remember going to gym sometimes. I would go to the Heralds, and we'd go to see Joy, and I would get to go to the bakery and pick out whatever I wanted. And
Yeah, that was always fun going to the
Yeah.
bakery. Oh, man, it
Yeah.
smelled great.
so I was always very close to my siblings because just that's the way life was, But I did have my time with my mom, but it also made me close to the rest of them.
I think that's one thing about our family, pretty much all of them, is I think we're all pretty close. I mean, I live way out there, but, I stay in touch. And mainly through Facebook, but I've always felt like our family has really been unique as far as not backbiting people.
Yeah.
I think that, and, we talked about our 2 bedrooms too,
Yeah.
sharing. And so, I'm quite a bit younger than Jim, so he was my big brother that I looked up after. But we were sleeping in this double bed. But what I remember in there too was he was into, at that time, wrestling was kind of a big thing. And he'd have these pictures of these wrestlers and stuff because he used to go into
Watching the
Bobby.
wrestling matches,
Yeah. And there was a couple times where it was like I would be one of his favorite wrestlers, and he would be another one. We'd be wrestling on the bed, and we'd get wrapped up, pull the curtains down, and have to put them back up before Mom find out.
Well, let's go on to the other part of the family, Grandpa. And, who,
Well,
obviously we all know he's the character he is. What's that first memory and perspective of Grandpa that you had as children?
Being chased around the coffee table in the living room because I don't know what I'd done. I'd done something, and he was mad at me, and he had his belt in his hand, and I was just running around the coffee table in the living room, and he was right behind me, and Mom yelling, "Jim, stop! Jim, stop!" And I can't remember if he ever caught me or not. But I can remember running from him.
I think you remember if he caught you.
Dad was mostly the discipliner. Mom was the ruler of the house, but Dad disciplined. So if we did something wrong, we dreaded when Dad got out of bed or
Yeah.
we got home from school because we were going to get it. And so basically,
yeah, basically, as far as the first thing,
yeah,
is being kind of scared of it.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you kept quiet when he was home.
My first memory was just fear. We just
Yeah.
feared our dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was grumpy and living in that small house,
You had to be quiet.
yeah, if you woke him up after he got home and got to sleep. And we
Was
woke
not
him
bad.
up if we were too noisy getting ready for school and come out of his belt and we got into it. And it didn't matter if it was one of us that woke him up, we all got it.
Yeah.
And he was just angry. But as I'm older, I stop and think about that. He'd work all night in the machine shop. He was a foreman. He may have had trouble on the machines or something. I mean, he was tired when he got home. Mom fixed him dinner. It would have been maybe 2:00 or so when they got to bed. So he was tired, and we wake him up. It made him angry. So I can kind of understand that now, but when we were kids, we scared of him.
We didn't get spankings, we got whippings.
Yeah, yeah.
So we really didn't have a relationship with that.
Not until he was older.
When you mentioned he might have been angry from work or something, Roger Isabel, which you all know, he worked there for a short time, and he told me that he saw Dad one time. He used to ride a bike, I guess, around to get his department. Roger said he saw him kick that bike all the way across the aisle once. So he got angry at work too.
Yeah.
He had a temper. Yeah.
I can remember, he was always angry. But my friends, if they called and said, hey, is your dad home? Yes, he's home. Okay, you come to my house. None of my friends wanted to come to our house if my dad was home. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't only us afraid of him, but our friends too.
So, Mom, you mentioned as you got older how that changed. How did it change you? How did you see him differently?
As he got older, and we got older, I know when I got married, he was really into it. I mean, he was happy and so on, and then when with his personality, I think that changed Dad a little bit, because Dan would joke with him and that. But the big difference that I seen in Dad was after Mom passed away. I just often always thought the Lord took Mom first because that's when Dad built a relationship with us kids, because he did a lot for us. He made
Yeah.
things, anything that we had
Needed
need
done.
help with or done, he did it. I mean, Dad was one thing about Dad was he was a hard worker.
He could do anything. Yeah.
Yeah, and
He
he was
was a
always working
craftsman.
around the house trying to
He
make
always had
improvements. and everything.
projects too.
Yeah,
And the thing that amazed me, how he got into, just like the furnace. I mean, how did he find out that the church was getting rid of that furnace? He takes it all out of there to get it. Leveled the backyard. They were replacing railroad ties along the railroad. And how whether he talked to somebody about getting them or whether he just decided, well, they're left alongside the tracks, so they're free for the taking. But anyhow, he had a homemade trailer he made from a car axle. And we would take them up and park them beside the railroad tracks along the side of the road, and then we'd carry those ties back. And of course, the further you got, the further it was to walk. And then he'd go to the next crossing until you got enough ties to build that wall. And it's amazing how long that has lasted.
Yeah.
And then on the, he built a prefab cabin he put on the mat on. And how the wood he got from that, he tore down an old farmhouse. And again, how did he find out that farmhouse was available to be tore down? I mean, it was amazing how he did that.
There's a guy that worked at
Yeah.
Paterno's or Wabco, I think it was Wabco then. The guy had a turkey farm, and somehow or another he knew about it, and he built that on his farm.
It's amazing how he could do all this stuff, and yes, he was a
That's how-
worker. I mean, you know, he was constantly at projects.
and he did everything. And of course, if we had to replace a hot water heater or anything, I mean, he did it. But one of us kids was always with, it's like anything he was doing, we had to help.
We were the gophers.
Yeah, and so we'd run back and forth to the garage to get him tools or whatever he needed. But through all that, I mean, carpentry work, replacing shingles on the roof, doing plumbing, electrical, whatever. But in working with him, I learned how to do all of this stuff. So, growing up, I mean, I did all my own work for a long time.
Yeah.
So, and I knew how to do it by working with him.
And Jim, you said one of the scariest things you remember about Dad at the well.
Yes, maybe I should mention that. When he was wanted to put the running water into the house, we had that well, and it's a deep well. It's quite a way down to the water. And one time he tried to pump it out, and he couldn't get it below 15 feet. So there's a lot of water down there. How he got down there was he put his feet against one side and his back against the other side, and he'd shinny down there. I would hand his tools and the pipe on a rope. I'd lower it to him. And can you imagine him in that position driving a pipe into the side of the well?
And just also people who may be watching us down the road don't know that, Grandpa had what, scarlet fever? Was that?
Yeah.
And had a leg that was completely underdeveloped from the
Yes.
other leg. So
Yeah.
Yeah, he
You know,
walked with a
walked with a limp. So to do that with one leg that was also underdeveloped, shorter, and not as muscular as the other is
Oh, it was
just,
just, and I was scared to death because I just knew he was going to fall down in that well. But yeah, that's definitely a memory that's burning in my mind.
Did he treat the girls different than the boys?
Well, obviously, I didn't know it, but listening to him, obviously.
Yeah.
I didn't seem to have, if I wanted to go down the woods, I'd go down the woods. I didn't have his mom telling me, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So when I hear this,
Yeah,
like I said, we had different parents.
Tell me about then the biggest thing, here you are as you were raising your kids and your personalizing that. What are the biggest takeaways? The things that you would say you learned the most from your parents?
I think probably discipline, maybe. I don't know, I think I raised them pretty much like Mom and Dad raised us, except my kids weren't afraid of me.
Yeah.
So, but I don't really feel like I did a whole lot different.
Yeah. But there are other parts that, like core values or things that you felt that you picked up from them that were important parts of your life?
But there was, you know, when we grew up, even we were pretty small, we had a huge garden. That's what we lived off of. And so it was kind of learning survival skills too. We learned how to garden. We learned how to, you know, pick vegetables and when they were ripe and whatever. And then we'd have to go take the tub to the well, and Jim and I'd sit there and it was our job to wash all the jars for Cammy. And Rosemary would help Mom in the kitchen getting stuff ready. And we'd spend days canning.
And I did not have that experience. There was no gardening when I was growing up. And I would even ask Mom about gardening, and she wanted nothing to do.
So I think we learned a lot of skills on how to get by
Well,
because of our parents.
And I think Mom taught us all how to cook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, she was,
Yeah.
you know, when she was doing things, I mean, she would interact with us and show us how to do things.
Yeah.
So,
One thing that I admire Mama when Dad set rules, she made sure that we did what he said. She always told me anyway that his mom, Grandpa set rules, but you know she didn't care, and so he always thought Mom didn't follow through when he wanted us to do a certain job or something like that. But Mom always followed through with what he said because, so she taught us that we had responsibilities and we had to do them. And then we were also Dad was really adamant on table manners because that's what he was taught. There was no talking at the table. We were not allowed to have a conversation at the table like we do with our families. That was taboo. But that's the way he was raised. And so we didn't talk at a table.
And you just, what was ever on the table, you took some of it because there wasn't going to be anything else. That was it.
That was it.
There was no snacks in between.
One of the things I really remember, and I think I've tried to carry with me, is family was very important to Mom, and I think Dad too.
Yeah.
So on Sundays, it was not unusual for us to go visit one of their siblings or an aunt or an uncle or whoever. And I mean, the whole time I was growing up, I remember we were all, you know, on a Sunday, we took a trip and we'd go visit, you know, Uncle Johnny, Wren, or, and go to their farm, or
Tommy, we used to go down there a lot.
Tommy and Aunt Marie's, or Uncle Louie's, or Aunt Margaret's, or, you know, we were always going. It was important to her to stay connected with her siblings. I don't remember them coming to visit us that often. Maybe once a year or so, you know, once a while. But it was very important to my mom that we go visit.
When Jim and Lois and I were kids, we didn't go visit anyone.
No.
Dad didn't have a lot of respect for Mom's family at that time. And
Mom had a
the only place we went to Grandma and Grandpa's in Peoria. And we kind of looked forward to that. It was just the three of us.
Yeah.
And before Gerry was born, and we'd go into Grandma and Grandpa's. And one of the memories when we went there, well, one of the things, we sang, if you remember that, we sat in the back and sang that song, Don't Fence Me In. That was a popular song. Remember us singing that together? And we'd sing that on the way to Peoria.
Yeah.
And then when we got to Grandma and Grandpa's, one of the things that Grandpa did for us, he would give us a dime. We would go to a couple blocks to a drugstore, and they had ice cream cones. You could get an ice cream cone for a dime. And then we always enjoyed getting those because in the bottom of the cone, it was the cone tip, there would be a free paper in there for a free cone. So you always look to see if you got it.
You got a free cone.
So that was one of the things that we did, but that was the only place I remember going,
Yeah.
was into their house. And,
Well, I remember.
Well,
and we went to Uncle John and Aunt Jessie's farm at times, and we would, sometimes us kids would stay there, kind of was our vacation. We'd stay
Yeah.
a week or two.
I stayed there a month at one time.
yeah.
Yeah, so
But that's kind of what the three of us, I know,
Mhm.
did.
tell me about it. So individually, that moment, biggest moment that stands out to your child, happiest moment that stands out for your childhood. What would that be?
Okay, I remember one Christmas, I got up and before anybody else, I snuck out there, and there was these cap guns with 2 holsters. And man, I still think of that. That was my happiest memory of it that I can think back on.
But the funniest thing I remember about Christmas is one year Mom got a new ironing board, and we wanted skis for the drop-off out there. I just knew we were going to get those skis. It was an ironing board for Mom. Oh, goodness. But mostly at Christmas time, we got what we needed, socks and underwear or coat.
Well, like Gerry said one time,
Yeah.
and I never thought about it till he said it, but he said, we were poor, we just didn't know it.
Yeah.
What's your happiest moment, Debbie?
You know, I had a lot of them, so I don't know how to point out one.
Well, you. We're not limited.
It's when everybody would come home for Sunday dinner. That was always a great day when everybody was there. Or canasta night, when everybody came and they'd be playing. Even when I wasn't old enough to play canasta, it was still fun because everybody was there. But my older nephews and nieces were there usually, and so I got to play with them, and we'd do our own little thing, and so that was fun. Gosh, I don't know. There's just a lot of things. 4th of July was wonderful.
I was just gonna bring that up, that was my great memory.
4th of July.
4th of July, because that's the one time Dad would buy cases of soda. We never got to drink soda.
Yeah.
We would have a case of soda, and we could go down there and help ourselves. That we didn't even have to ask anybody. And we'd have sparklers and stuff, and Poples would come over, and we'd put this
Show a movie.
sheet hanging on the tree in the front yard. And he would show, and when it got dark at night, and he would show movies, and we'd have cartoons, and then we'd sit and watch a movie at night. And that movie would show through the screen, and sometimes people driving, and they would park out in the street.
Yes. And watch the movie.
Watch the movie from their car.
From the backside.
On the backside of on the sheet would show through.
Now, was that Ralph that was bringing the
Ralph,
projector?
yeah.
So, you know, I remember Ralph as a kid going over there, and he had a TV
Repair business at one
and that,
time.
so,
Yeah.
And so,
Matter of
And that
fact,
was-
that's how we got our first TV in the 50s, right?
Yeah.
We got our,
And that reminds me of when we were kids too. There was always a free movie, remember,
Yeah.
over at the sportsman thing we'd go to?
Popcorn for us, and we'd
Yeah.
have Kool-Aid.
Yeah, we'd take that with us and we'd go to
It
the.
was on Thursday night.
Yeah,
go up there and sit on a blanket.
yeah,
They
And
would
watch a
show
movie.
movies on the side of the building up there.
Yeah.
happiest moment?
Happiest moment, I'm trying to think. Probably my 13th birthday, because that's the first time I had a birthday party. And Dad strung some lights outside, and I had maybe half a dozen classmates. And we had glazed donuts, and we hardly ever had a donut, so that was quite a treat. And they had some games. I don't remember the games we played, but I don't even know that I got any gifts. It was just a party. And that was a special time. Another time when I was in might have been 7th grade. At Christmas time, I got a phonograph, and we wound it up to play records. I got some of the records yet. That was a special time. Another time, one thing I remember doing with Dad, he wanted Mom to go to a movie one time. I may have been 10. I think it was before Gerry and Debby. Jerry may have been a baby, I'm not sure. But anyway, he wanted Mom to go to a movie, and Mom wouldn't go. I know the reason she didn't go, because she didn't want to leave us kids. She didn't think I was old enough. So she told Dad that don't take me. So I went to a movie with Dad. That's the only thing I remember doing with Dad as a kid. And so that was a special thing for me. I don't know. Another, just a happy time was going to Grandma and Grandpa's and staying with them for a few days. And I was by myself. When I was home, I had to share everything. When I went to Grandma and Grandpa's, I was on my own. And I even sat on the porch out here, and those memories come to me, because I would sit on their porch, and I would hear the tamale guy was on a bike, and I had that box on there. He sold hot tamales, and he would tell his thing all through the neighborhoods, hot tamales, and whatever they cost.
Yeah.
He would say that in the evenings, and then there was the ice cream guy on a bicycle, and would be going by selling popsicles and ice cream. And I would hear that and sit on the porch. You could hear that around the neighborhood. And those memories come to me, and then I sit on the porch and with my color book and crayons, and I remember one color book I had was Judy Garland. She was the popular one in the movies. And I had a Judy Garland color book, and I would color sitting on the porch and hearing all those sounds, the sounds of the city. And I enjoyed those songs.
And Lois?
I really can't pinpoint one thing, but one thing we really had fun doing once in a while. We would get a quarter, and Jim and we'd go to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and we'd walk to the theater and stop at Zoll's and get us some candy and go to the movie on that quarter. So we'd walk there by ourselves and back, so which was pretty good for us. Yeah.
My first
weren't
memory
that
of
old.
going to that movie was, I remember at that time, Grandma gave me a dime, but I just went to the movie. I mean, I didn't no candy or anything. And it was Alexander's Ragtime Band.
Yeah.
And I remember the woman, this is way back, and her face was real white, and she had a big black beauty spot. And I still remember.
But we'd go to the Avon Theater every once in a while. We'd go into Grandma and Grandpa's and then walk to the theater and see Tom Mix and the Lone Ranger and whatever. But also enjoyed my times at Aunt Jessie and Uncle Johnny's, and we'd ride Dick and Dan. Workhorses. You couldn't hardly get your legs around them, but we'd ride them. And one time they decided they didn't want to be ridden, and they bucked Jim and I off. And Uncle Johnny says, well, you can't just let him get by with that. You have to get back on. So I got back on, and Uncle Johnny led him for a little ways, and then he gave me the reins and said, "Okay, he's going to be all right." So,
Yeah, I remember those horses very well.
yeah.
You know,
So,
Rosemary talking about the delivery guys,
Yeah.
you know, at grandma and
Yeah.
grandpa's reminded me of here. I can remember the Iceman coming
Mhm.
by because we had an ice box. This is before we had the electric refrigerator, and he would deliver blocks of ice. And Borland Dairy the guy would come by and deliver milk,
Yeah.
milk products, and pick up the empty bottles and stuff. So,
I do remember that.
What were you most curious about as a child? What did you want to be? What were you most curious about? Or what did you want to be when you're sitting there? What did you dream about, want to be when
well,
you grew up?
I can answer. We got our first TV, and I don't know, it was in the 50s sometime. But anyway, sat there and all these westerns would be on, you know, and you'd watch Lash LaRue and Roy Rogers and all these different things. And you had maybe one or two stations that would come in fairly decent. And so Dad, he upgraded. After that, sometime we got an upgrade, and we put this big tower up, because you had a big antenna on the roof. And I can remember Dad being up there and us kids down there, and, well, how is it now? You know, moving this thing around. Well, you get one or two in good, but, you know, maybe one, the other one wouldn't be very good. So he put this antenna up, and you had a rotor. And it was on the top of a tower. And so that you'd be watching it, you could turn the rotor so you'd tweak in, and so the TV would come up
And
there.
it was still all snow.
Yeah, but I was fascinated with that technology. And this is long before, you know, we didn't have any cell phones or anything else. But as I grew toward a teenager, I would play around with like a D battery and just playing around with electronics and looking at science, or there's Popular Science and some of the magazines that would be at, you know, different places you'd go. You could look through that stuff. And I kind of just self-taught myself electronics. Not that I was all that smart, but and it got toward the end that as I was getting close to, I don't know, it was 12, 13 or something. But there was this company, it was called Allied Electronics, and you could buy kits. And I was working at the time, making a little money, saved up. So I bought this transmitter kit and put it together, and you could, supposedly, it had a little short antenna on it, and you could broadcast 50 feet legally. You know, you wouldn't get in trouble. So I got that, and I was just playing around and got hooked up. I didn't have microphones or anything, but I knew I could take like old radios and stuff that were junk, tear them off. I could use a speaker for a microphone. And so I kept tweaking this thing. Well, by the time I was, I don't know, maybe freshman in high school or something, I can't remember exactly when, but the furnace ended up, we had the coal furnace, and Dad converted it to gas. And so the coal room wasn't being used anymore. So I cleaned it out, and I built a radio station down there from just old radio parts and everything else. And I kept playing around with this transmitter, and I had a console built where I could talk and introduce records. I had like 2 turntables, I could flip them on, and I could fade my voice out and fade the thing in. And I ended up, I had it where I could broadcast basically across Hanna City. And anyway, that's what I'd do after school. We'd sit down there and we'd have programs going on. And it was working great until one day the state policeman showed up. I was at school, but Dad was home. He knocked on the door and he says, "You have an illegal radio station here." My dad said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "My son's got some stuff down the basement." He says, "Well, you gotta an illegal radio station and he needs to shut it off. So that ended WGR. But
It was interfering with the airplane.
And I can remember my job for the radio station was to take the requests that come in on the telephone. I'd answer the telephone for special requests for, certain songs or whatever.
Anybody else? What were you curious about or want to be? What were those dreams as a kid?
I always just thought about being a secretarial work. That's kind of where my mind was set. I kind of thought at times about nursing, but really the secretarial part was what I enjoyed most. And that's what I took when I went into high school, was secretarial training course.
I just thought I wanted to be a nurse, but that was not possible with the means that we had.
Yeah.
So you just did what you needed to do.
Yeah, the only thing I could think of is I can't say I really had a goal to like be a certain industry or something, but like Gerry mentioned, I was Dad's gopher from my childhood. And so I kind of thought about construction, but I never did. And I really didn't even care to once I got it over.
Debbie, anything come to mind?
Not particularly because I seem like I just changed my mind every so often, It was like secretarial work and working in an office sounded, and I did take those kind of classes in high school. Sometimes it was teaching. I thought, I think it would be kind of fun to teach. I loved history, so I thought I'd love to be a history teacher. But couldn't afford the college and the schooling and that took. But I knew because of our parents, you needed to have a job and you needed to be able to take care of yourself and don't expect handouts or anybody to take care of you. You worked for what you wanted.
Did you pay rent
Yes.
when you got a job?
Yes.
I think we
Yes,
all paid
once
rent
we-
when we
Yeah,
got
I
a
did.
job.
yeah,
And it was $10 a week if you did your own laundry, you picked up after yourself and that kind of thing. $15 a week if Mom had to do your laundry and ironing and stuff for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought of something else too. This has to do with Lois mostly, I think. When we had the TV and stuff, but this is like the difference between Mom and Dad. When Dad was there, we had to be quiet. Lois used to watch American Bandstand with Dick Clark, wasn't it? And some of the neighborhood girls and stuff. The living room was just, they were in there dancing, this thing was playing. I mean, it's just been.
Sounds fun. So here's, I was going to ask this, or we talked about you guys, the meals were basically out of the garden. What was a gourmet meal at your house? What was a special meal? What did it consist of?
Anything that was sweet, because we didn't get candy and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd have breakfast, we'd have milk toast. We had sugar on it, So I don't know, that and of course the fried chicken.
Yeah. And
Very
Debbie
good.
doesn't remember eating milk toast.
No.
But that was when you didn't have anything else.
Yeah,
You
that's
had a
right.
piece of toast with some milk and
Sugar
a little
bread.
sugar on it.
Sugar bread.
And
But-
that's what we had for breakfast.
My favorite thing was the spaghetti.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, but she would be cooking and that spaghetti sauce would be cooking in that cast iron skillet. And that was, I still remember that today, man. That was, when we had spaghetti, man, that was so
That was good.
Yeah.
It would be Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners
Mhm.
because we would have baked chicken. We never had turkey, but I think the chicken probably got from Uncle John and Jesse's
Yeah.
farm. And I think Jim
Well,
went down to Craples and
Yeah, I
got
was gonna say,
chicken.
most of the chickens,
It's the farm
I did
just
too.
down this road here.
I did 2 a week from Craples, and also cream.
Yeah.
2 chickens and a jar of cream.
And so she would have to dress those chickens, and we would have baked chicken for those special holidays and pumpkin pie. We had a nice dinner and dressing, and so those were special dinners that
Yeah.
that we had that we look forward to. We wouldn't have otherwise.
That's when I got a taste for rhubarb too. Because she
Yeah.
used to make like a rhubarb pudding.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's sour, but it had a little bit of a sweet taste too.
Yeah. And we had chickens for a short time when we were kids. We had, that's
Oh,
when the chicken house got built back there.
yeah, yeah.
We had,
I wanna, so you're growing up, there was a ton of history that happened during your childhood. I've made some notes here. I mean, you were born coming out of the Depression, so, you know, your parents had very much the Depression and that part of their life on their mind as they're, you know, raising you. Then World War II in 1939, Pearl Harbor in 41, D-Day in 44, an atomic bomb in 45, you know, the Cold War 46, Korean War 1950, Vietnam 1955, Sputnik, we start people putting into space in 1957, the Civil Rights Act in 1960, you know, I remember as a child the civil rights
Mhm.
stuff was gigantic, and then 1962 is an assassination of a president.
Yep.
And then there was the, you know, the 60s, the whole hippie movement and all that going on.
First
So-
man on the moon.
Yeah. So you look at all that stuff that was going on at that time. How did these different events had to affect you in your life, or either be scary or just put some sort of impression on you? What do those events make giant impressions on you?
Well, kind of what I got out of that was technology built on technology. And so I just in my mind, I would think, you know, what's it going to be like 10 years from now? Because it might take 20 years to come up with something, but the next thing would only be 10 years. The next thing would be 2 years, you know? So I thought about that a lot, you know, what's it going to be like in 10 years? So I guess that's what I got out
Yeah.
of all this, you know.
Think of the technology side of it
Yeah.
and the improvements you were seeing.
I can remember sitting in my 6th grade classroom and watching the first astronaut go into space. You know, I mean, that was unbelievable that, you know, this man was leaving the atmosphere,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
and I can remember that and being such a big deal. 8th grade, our president was assassinated. That was probably the scariest day I remember, because I can remember our principal, Mr. Long, coming in and telling us, you know, this is what has happened, and so you need to go home. You know, and I can remember being so afraid because somebody had assassinated our president, who was very popular. And I ran all the way home because if Russia was going to drop a bomb on our heads, I wanted to be home with my mom.
For me, the Second World War, because I was 5 when that happened. I just was starting school. We lived in Bellevue. We were, of course, everything was rationed. Things were beginning that way, and I was scared to death of airplanes. I didn't know that we lived close to an airport. And one time I was walking, I don't know if I was walking to school or walking to Pearl and Frank's store that Lois was talking about a while ago. It was just a walk up the street from where we lived. But I was there and this plane was going real low. And I was scared to death because I thought it was going to drop a bomb on us. Because I didn't know just what was going on, but I knew that there was something that wasn't good. And another thing was, I remember all of the newspaper drives, and you know, the country was cleaned up. Everything was saved. String was saved. I remember going down the street, and if there was cigarette package laying anywhere, we picked it up and peeled the foil off the inside. You made foil into balls and turned that in. They used foil for something. So, and then paper drives, nothing was wasted. Scrap, there was no scrap around because they took all that scrap and melted it down and used it for the war effort. It was just scary. We would have blackouts, and we lived in Bellevue during those blackouts. And we were ordered to turn all the lights out. No one was to smoke a cigarette, no light at all, because planes going over could see that. So we would sit outside and just sit there over this time period when, I don't know, half hour or so, whenever the country was put through practicing this. And I don't know if it was the whole country or just spaces of areas, but that was frightening because I was old enough to know there was something going on, but I didn't understand what it was.
I can remember in grade school going through drills for a nuclear bomb.
That's,
You know, and you'd have to get under your desk and cover your head, and so I remember those.
yeah, that's what I was gonna talk about. The whole country was, looking for, here's where you would go in case of a nuclear attack. So like in places where they had subway tunnels and that kind of thing, and they'd be marked nuclear shelters and that. But like living out here, it's like, okay, what are we gonna do? But there was actually then plans come out, and some people were actually building fallout shelters in their backyards. And again, like in popular science and places, they'd actually show designs of how you would do that and what you should stock in there, you know, for water and different things. And so, you know, to have the whole country talking about that and planning, I mean, that was scary. I mean, that was something that, you know, you thought about, and you thought, oh, okay, well, if we get attacked by a nuclear attack, you know, we're all gonna maybe not survive. And then you thought about, okay, well, what if I go into shelter and I survive it, but what do you come out, you know?
What's going to be there when you come out?
Yeah. And at that time, you know, you remember about Hiroshima, and so, and I remember in high school for a book report, I read that book, and it just talked about, you know, all the devastation and how people were badly burned, and the clothes were just burned off of them, but yet the pattern of the clothes would burn into their skin. So it was.
It was scary at times, yeah.
Anything else to you that stands out?
I don't think so. I think it was.
I think one thing about you getting under the desk for a nuclear attack, that had to really be protected.
That's absolutely worthless.
Yeah. But you know, like through my teenage years, President Kennedy was assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. You know, it seems like my whole teenage years, there was assassination after assassination. Plus, there was the Bay of Pigs, and there was the Cuba Missile Crisis. And so my teenage years, it seemed like there was just nothing but fear, you know.
And the big thing of
And
publicized
Vietnam.
with Khrushchev and pounding his shoe on the table and saying, I will bury you. You know?
Yeah. And they had the Vietnam War, and you know, Gerry was in that war. So many people we knew were fighting that war were gone. Some of them didn't come back. There was just a lot going on. Civil rights. You know, there was a time when, I don't know, was it like 100 cities was on fire across the country during the civil rights movements. I mean, there was so much.
And in the 60s with all the hippies and the rioting and the,
Yeah.
Demonstrations.
Yeah.
Let's talk. So, this is no surprise that Aunt Lois was the rebel here. But so, you're the first one to move away from Hanna City, right?
Yeah.
You moved to Indianapolis, is that
Yeah.
Do I have that right? When was that?
In 59.
How was that for the rest of you? All of a sudden you've gone,
It's in
you've all
59.
grown up, you know, in this little house. You haven't moved away yet. You're still here at the time, and then Aunt Lois falls in love, gets married, and moves to Indianapolis. What was the effect on the family?
I was always with.
Yeah.
Lois.
I
So
remember-
I can remember going with her and her friends. I went to the drive-ins with them. I went to the skating rinks with them. I went everywhere with them. I liked Bob. Bob was fun. I thought them getting married, that was great and that was fun. And then all of a sudden, somebody didn't tell me they were moving away. So when I understood that they were leaving and going far away, I can remember sitting in the back porch, and I wasn't going to say goodbye. I wouldn't say nothing to nobody. And Mom come and got me and made me go up and tell them goodbye. And I never liked Bob because he's taking my sister away from me.
But that was a big deal. I mean, you guys had all grown up, you know, it just was a family that all kind of lived together. Did it make it easier for you when you went to California? Knowing that you could move outside of Hanna City and you'd stay, you didn't
Well, it
evaporate?
didn't really bother me, but actually it bothers me now more. Although I've been out there forever, and I really like living there, I really do. But the older I get, the more I miss family dinners and all that stuff. But at the time, no, I mean, I went out there, I got a job, and I ended up in a job that I loved. And so I never have regretted it.
Yeah. So, and then Gerry, and not voluntarily, ended up spending a year in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, you're still very involved with the guys you were with, and you know, we talked about it quite a bit. But how did it affect the rest of you? I mean, I know I can remember, you know, at that time, obviously it was Walter Cronkite was, you know, on the news, and we were getting reports every night. I believe it was, you know, Dan Rather on the front lines and reporting from the front lines. It was a time that was very visible to us, and knowing that, you know, your brother's over there.
It was scary.
It was a
It was
weight,
scary.
because I
very
prayed for
concerning.
him every day, and I felt bad that I was living here safe, and I knew that he was out there not knowing what he was facing from day to day. And I remember us as a family going to, you and Craig and Lynette and I, Dad, we were at Shakey's, you know, and having pizza, and I thought, here I am eating pizza, and you're singing with the movie there, and what's Gerry doing? I just didn't feel like I had a right to do that. And then we wrote to him a lot. I wish I'd have saved all his letters. I didn't.
I do have a few saved.
But we sent him boxes. I don't know. I probably all crumbled cookies.
Yeah.
Crumbs,
When they finally made it,
Yeah.
it was a
But
treat when you're living off
That
sea
was
rations.
They have bugs in them.
I was concerned for Mom
Yeah.
because I knew that she had a heavy heart, not knowing what he was facing. But we prayed and he got home. And
Yeah.
so we're thankful. But yeah, I know he has a lot of internal scars.
I mean, that could be a whole separate interview just to set with Gerry. But just
Yes.
quickly, what was the impact on your life?
Well, I learned to function in very difficult situations. I was a team chief of a 3-man communication team. We were frontline communications, secure communications for search and destroy operations. Well, the operations that I was always sent out on usually were like search and destroy missions. We were a corps level, unit, First Field Force 2 Corps. So 2 Corps was Central Highlands, which was highly contested. The theory was that if you controlled the Central Highlands, you controlled Vietnam. And so there was a lot of major battles there. And being in 2 Corps, the units that were a part of that was 101st Airborne, 4th Infantry, 173rd Airborne, 5th Special Forces, and the 1st Air Cav. And so when General Lawson was head of 1st Field Force, would order the 101st out on a search and destroy mission somewhere, our teams would go out to be their secure communications. So I ended up doing 2 missions with 101st. I was with 4th Division, and not the whole division a lot of times. It might just been a brigade or so. I was with them 2 or 3 times. 1st Air Cav. Usually when I was with 4th Infantry, 1st Air Cav was also there. And then my last mission was Battle of Dak To with 4th Infantry Division was in charge of the operation. The 173rd was there. And that was a major battle. You can look at it and Google it. But when the 173rd Airborne took L-875, the enemy decided to leave the battlefield. We declared victory, and it was some victory. We had over 1,000 wounded. We lost almost 500 men in that 27 days of fighting. And we had 2 teams up there that was their secure communications. And anyway, when the 173rd took Hill 875, that was Thanksgiving Day, 1967. Excuse me. It's okay. So Thanksgiving is kind of hard. And also, Dad died on Thanksgiving Day. I'm sorry.
That's, I know it's tough to talk about, but
It's important history. It's important. And it's important, I think, that people know what it was really like for them. Because back home they weren't being appreciated.
no, it was a difficult time over here because people, it was, I compared a lot to what we go through now. So there's a lot of similarities to our current day that we're setting in to the time that you guys were, going through at that time during that civil rights movement and the hippie movement and the anti-Vietnam movement was very similar to what we're reflecting on, I think, as a country right now. So I think it is important to understand that, history does in ways repeat itself, not in the war necessarily, but in the way that we have to react to it as a country. So,
when guys were coming home, a lot of them, they were told that if they had civilian clothes, we were issued a Class A uniform when we got back, if you're going home. But they told a lot of them, if you had civilian clothes, you might want to wear those home because of all the issues. And when I came back, they'd been processing a lot of people in Oakland, and there was all kinds of protests and stuff there. They flew us back into an Air Force base next to Fort Lewis, Washington, and I think we landed at like midnight at night. They put us on a bus bus us over to Fort Lewis, to process out. So,
Let's move on to best change that you've seen in your lifetime.
Best change. There's been so many.
Yeah.
Change is the one thing that you can always depend on, because life never stays the same. There is always change.
I think the biggest thing is when I actually went into a different type of profession and, went into the purchasing field. That's definitely, I think, my biggest one.
Biggest change?
Yeah, best change. It could be of what you saw in technology or the world or whatever it might be. What sort of changes that you feel that were good? I know you well. I know you think there's a lot of changes that are bad.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of.
Actually, the industry that
Yeah.
I worked in was aerospace. And so we saw a lot of changes, the different aircrafts and the requirements it took and all that. So yeah, I mean, I seen changes mainly through where I work.
There's been a lot of changes, but Bob and I have talked many times that we lived in the best time. We didn't know we was poor, but we had fun with nothing. Just the neighborhood kids getting together playing baseball or kick the can or,
King of the Hill.
just,
Red light, blue light,
Yeah,
or no,
yeah.
red light, yellow light, green light.
yeah. And we lived in good times. I mean, our whole neighborhood got along and we had a good time as kids, even though we had chores and work to do. Our time that we didn't have work, we were all together playing games and having fun and not thinking about working my thumbs on on a phone or whatever. And I don't think the kids have fun like these days, like we did.
I think, for me personally, the biggest change in my life was probably when I surrendered my life to the Lord.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
It changed me. And it wasn't instantaneous, but, and I didn't always stay where I should have been. I wandered off and did things I shouldn't have been doing and things like that. But I learned. I learned from all those experiences. I learned from bad decisions, but when things got really tough in my personal life and I ended up being a single mom with 6 kids to raise on my own financially and in all ways, that's who was there besides my family and some friends. But that's who was there that I knew I could depend on. And when I look back now, as the years have went by, are things perfect? No, they're not perfect. Things were difficult. Things were very difficult. But the lessons I learned are invaluable. And was it change? Oh yeah, there was major change. But now, I wouldn't have done it different. Yeah, I could look back and say, well, I could have done better here. I wished I'd been a little more attentive to, what was going on with the kids at this point, or that. I can look back, but at the same time, I really wouldn't change it because I learned too many valuable lessons.
That's what I must say. And as far as the change was when I accepted the Lord as my Savior, and that happened when I was 14. Well, I was maybe 13. It was in July, and our church was having evangelistic meetings on the school grounds at this park district now. And I went to those, and that's when I accepted the Lord, and I wanted to do that even at church, because we had a Baptist pastor and Presbyterian church, and he gave an invitation every Sunday, and I always wanted to go up, but I was too shy to do that. But when I went to these meetings over at the school ground, I could not stay on my seat any longer. The Lord just grabbed me by the neck, and I went, Lord, and I can't even explain how I felt, but I felt the cleanest that I'll ever feel until when I get to heaven with the Lord. I will have all that weight of sin lifted off me. But that's an experience I will never forget, and I know I've made many mistakes and bad decisions and will still will. But I've had the Lord to lean on. And then the physical change, I think of Mom, how she had to do laundry and dishes and the inconveniences that she had that I have now. And because I can remember when she had to heat water in the summertime, Dad built like a fire pit outside, and us kids had to pump all this water for laundry and drinking water and everything. Yeah, it did turn this pump. Yeah. And we pumped this water, and Mom had this tub on this fire and heat the water outside because it was so hot to heat the house. And and then before where the bathroom and the washer and dryer are now, that was a porch, open porch. And so the wash machine was kept out on this porch. And that's where we did our laundry, on this porch. Then when he filled that in, then it was done inside. We had a ring washer. So we did it in the kitchen. But the changes of the way Mom had to do things and the way, the convenience that I have, it's not work.
Yeah.
And we had to hang the clothes outside in the wintertime.
Yeah.
There was lines strung in the kitchen back and forth. And hang those clothes up in the house, and when they dry, you put another load on there, and it was a hard life. And in the kitchen, and you had to cook in there and duck these clothes and fire up those stoves. That was Jim's job, to take the clinkers and the ashes out of those stoves.
Then I inherited that after he.
Yeah.
Lois and I was to do dishes, we cleaned the house, and
We hung laundry on wash
it was
day.
just
It's our job to
inconvenience.
hang it.
Well, you mentioned too about, I remember we had that big wash tub. We used to take baths in that thing in the kitchen before we had inside
We
plumbing.
never had that.
On the lighter side, you talk about us going out to pump water. I remember one time I went out there, what made me do it, I don't know, but I stuck my tongue in the handle. Mom came out with warm water to pour over it, get me loose. Why I did that, I don't know.
One of the memories I have about Mom, whether you was cleaning with her, doing dishes with her, whatever, cooking with her humming and singing.
Yeah.
And in the garden was her favorite hymn. She was always singing in the garden.
Yeah.
And just a note about change, but the one thing that comes to me, when I got out of the service, I was working full time, but I was going to college, and I got into programming computerized machine tools in a factory, and I was doing tool design. And we had the big drawing boards and everything that we worked on. And as you're working out all of these movements for the machine tool to program it, that was all done by hand. And you had a little book, and you had to figure out an angle, you know, the distance, or whatever, or the hypotenuse or something. You had the book, Illinois Toolworks, remember that thing? And you'd open up the back of it, and you'd figure out what that angle was, and you'd look up the log table for that, and then you had to calculate out and trig it all out for that angle, for that move, and whatever. And I remember the first day that these calculators came out, and TI had a calculator that had trig functions and stuff on it. And one of the guys who was working in our department up there bought one of those and brought it to work. And there was hardly anything done that day. We were all sitting there, oh yeah, well look, you want the sign of this, or, you know. And it wasn't long, we all had one of those calculators, but I imagine kids today can't even imagine probably doing trig and geometry and everything, but, you know, without anything but log tables and, you know, a pad and pencil. And
We now carry a computer, calculator, recording device, camera, video player in our pocket. You know,
Yeah.
to think that how many rooms that phone used to fill with all the functions that it does.
I remember my first computer cost $3,000, and all I could do is play a couple of games on it.
Well, only got a few more questions left, and then we've been here a while. But I want to, what have you wanted to do in your lifetime that you either haven't done yet or just didn't do? Is there something that just like, this is something I always wanted to do but haven't done it?
You know what, I feel like I've led a pretty, you know, full, I mean, as far as vacations and all the, you know, things, fortunately, you know, I was afforded to do. I really can't think of anything that's on my bucket list.
You never wanted to jump out of a perfectly good plane?
Huh?
Never wanted to jump out of a perfectly
Oh,
good
no.
plane?
I did, and Bob wouldn't let me. He got the offer to do it free when they were doing that at the airport. And I said, well, I'll take your place. No, you won't. So he wouldn't let me do it.
Mine's really easy, because I was really into downhill skiing, and I got to be pretty proficient at it, and I skied a lot of places overseas. And my thing was I was going to take a trip. I wanted to ski the downhill run at Kitzbühel. Kitzbühel, Austria, is kind of like the Super Bowl of downhill skiing, and so it's a big deal, especially in Europe. People follow it. And I had actually made it to Kitzbühel once. We were skiing in Austria, but they were setting up for the skiing, the big competition, world competition. And so they were setting it up. So I've got pictures of the setup and, you know, and everything, but obviously they weren't allowing anybody. So we went there, spent the day, had lunch and everything, rode the train back to where we were staying. So I got to see all that, but yeah, that's one thing on my bucket list is probably never going to happen now.
One of the things, though, that we were talking about places we went and whatever, but there was two places that just flabbergasted me. That was Pompeii. It was just unreal, you know, when you've seen how those people live, and how many years ago that was, and they lived in these stone homes, but they had mosaic tile with patterns and stuff on the floor. I mean, I was just so impressed with that stuff, you know. And there was another one where we went, and there was this city that had the wall around it, had the moat, had the drawbridge, and it was still just like it was back then. You had to walk across the drawbridge to get into the city. And there were people, you can imagine what those rooms were like. And there were people that were actually living in some of them rooms, and they had an electric extension cord going around, and then they had extension cords going into these rooms. Obviously, they didn't have any toilets, they didn't have anything in there. And it's just amazing that somebody was still living in that. But that was an amazing place to see.
Was that in Italy? Or
The
was that in
extension cords,
Italy?
didn't we?
Italy. Well, Italy was where Pompeii was, but the other place was in northern Africa. I can't remember the name of the place now.
Hey, thank you for joining the world premiere of Growing Up Wren. I apologize for the abrupt ending, but the 5 interviewees talked so much that the hard drives were stuffed so full of video that we were unable to recover about the remaining 20 minutes or so. But don't fret. Brent, who did the recording for us, had an excellent idea of getting the 4 locals back together and having Uncle Jim join via the web, or just so we have his audio, that we can wrap this up. But it also gives all of you a chance to participate as well. I'm sure as you watch this, you may have had some questions of your own that you would have liked to ask. And please text those to me. And I'd love to try to include as many of those as I can into part 2 of Growing Up Wren. So thank you very much for joining, and stay tuned for part 2 of Growing Up Wren.